Be my wife for 2 minutes, the millionaire pleaded, and the reason he gave left her in shock. Naomi had served coffee to hundreds of people, but no one had ever cried while making such an absurd request. My son is dying, and he just wants to see his mom one last time. Naomi Castillo was wiping down tables at a small cafe called the Morning Star on Main Street in a bustling American city when she noticed the man sitting alone in a corner booth. He hadn't touched the latte she'd served him 15 minutes prior. He was just staring at his phone, his eyes red and puffy as if he'd been crying. It was late afternoon and the usual hustle was beginning to slow. Naomi, 31, had worked there for 4 years. She knew this type of customer well, the ones who arrived carrying a heavy sadness, lingering for hours while pretending their coffee was still hot. The man lifted his head and their eyes met. "Excuse me for bothering you," he said, his voice raspy. Could you sit here for a minute?" Naomi hesitated. He was wearing an expensive suit, but it was wrinkled, like he'd slept in it. He looked to be in his mid-40s, with dark, graying hair and an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "Sir, I'm working," she replied politely. "Please." He narrowed his eyes as if gathering his courage. "I only need 2 minutes. I'll pay whatever it takes." Naomi glanced at the cafe's owner, Mr. Johnson, who was at the counter counting the day's earnings. He nodded, intrigued. She pulled up a chair and sat, keeping her hands clasped in her lap. "What do you need, sir?" The man took a deep breath. "My name is Ethan Carter, and I need you to pretend to be my wife." Naomi blinked, confused. "What?" "Just for 2 minutes," he rushed on, his voice cracking. "My son is at St. Jude's Children's Hospital. He's 7 years old. He has terminal cancer. The doctors say he won't make it past this week." A knot tightened in Naomi's chest. "I'm so sorry," she murmured. "He asked to see his mom one last time." Ethan closed his eyes. "But his mother died in childbirth. He never knew her. And I lied to him." Naomi frowned. "You lied?" "When he was little, I told him his mom traveled a lot for work, that she was always far away, but thought about him every day. I thought it would be easier than telling him the truth, but now he's dying and he just wants to see her." Ethan's voice broke, and he covered his face with his hands. Naomi sat silently, trying to process it all. "And you want me to pretend to be her?" Ethan nodded, his eyes pleading. "I know it's insane. I know I have no right to ask you this, but he's in so much pain. And I promised her he'd come. I promised he would see her before he couldn't finish the sentence." Tears stung Naomi's eyes. She was an aunt to 2 little nephews and couldn't imagine this man's pain. "Why me?" she asked softly. Ethan looked at her with an intensity that made her pull back slightly. He described his mom based on the few photos he saw. He said she had long, dark hair, brown eyes, a kind smile. "When you approached my table, I thought, maybe you don't have to do anything but walk into the room, hold his hand, and tell him you love him. That's all. 2 minutes." Naomi looked at her own trembling hands. "This isn't right," she said. "Lying to a dying child?" "I know," Ethan's voice was barely a whisper, "but he's so scared and I don't know how to give him what he needs. I don't know how to make my son feel whole before he goes." Naomi took a deep breath. She thought of all the reasons to say no, but when she looked back at Ethan, she saw the same despair her own father had when her mother was sick. "When?" she asked, surprising herself. "Now, please. He's awake and I don't know for how long." Ethan swallowed hard. Naomi stood up, her legs weak. "I'll grab my purse." 20 minutes later, they were standing outside the massive children's hospital. Naomi had never been inside such a huge building with all its white walls and the unmistakable smell of disinfectant. Ethan stopped before they reached the elevator. "His name is Damien," he said, "and I told him yours was Anna." "Anna," Naomi repeated, her voice distant. "You don't need to know anything else. Just be kind. He's an incredible kid." Ethan's voice cracked again. They rode up to the 4th floor. The pediatric wing hallway was decorated with colorful drawings, but the silence was heavy. Ethan paused outside a door marked Room 412. "Ready?" he asked. Naomi wasn't, but she nodded anyway. The door opened, and she saw a small bed in the center of the room. In it, a boy, too thin, bald, with tubes connected to his arm, turned his face towards them and smiled. "Daddy!" Damien said, his voice weak but full of hope. You brought her? Ethan looked at Naomi with pleading eyes. She took a deep breath, walked into the room, and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. Naomi had never been so frightened by a smile. Damien looked at her with wide eyes, bright with tears he was trying to hold back. He was so small in that hospital bed, so fragile that Naomi had to hold her breath to keep from crying right then and there. Hello, my love, she said, her voice softer than she expected. She walked to the bed and sat in the chair beside it. Ethan stood near the door, watching with a heartbreaking expression. Damien reached out his thin, cold hand. Naomi took it, feeling how icy it was. You came, the boy whispered. Daddy said you were traveling, but you came to see me. Of course I came, Naomi replied, swallowing the lump in her throat. I wouldn't miss it for the world. You're pretty, Damien said with a weak smile. Daddy has a picture of you, but it's from when you were younger. You're still pretty. Naomi felt the tears welling up. Thank you, sweetie. And you've gotten so big. Damien let out a chuckle, but it turned into a cough. Ethan stepped forward, worried, but the boy caught his breath. I'm a big boy now, right? Damien said. But now I'm tired. The doctors say, he looked at Ethan. Daddy, can I talk to her alone? Ethan looked surprised. Damien, please. Daddy, just for a little bit. Ethan hesitated but nodded. He gave Naomi a look, which she subtly returned, and then left the room, closing the door. Damien waited until he was sure they were alone. Then he looked at Naomi with a seriousness that didn't match his 7 years. You're not my mom, are you? Naomi froze. What? What are you saying? I know you're not, Damien said calmly. My mom died when I was born. Daddy doesn't know, but I overheard him talking to my grandma last year. She said he had to tell me the truth. Naomi didn't know what to say. She felt like the floor had vanished beneath her feet. Damien, don't be mad, the boy interrupted. I didn't tell Daddy because he already suffers so much. I know he pretends everything's fine, but I see him when he cries in the bathroom or when he looks at her picture and goes quiet. Naomi squeezed Damien's hand, unsure if it was to comfort him or herself. Then why did you ask to see her? She asked softly. Damien smiled, a sad smile. Because I wanted my daddy to feel better. He worries about me so much, and I don't want him to be alone when I go. Naomi couldn't hold back her tears. They ran down her face as she looked at this incredibly brave boy. You're very smart, she said, her voice broken. And you're kind, Damien replied. Daddy asked you to come, right? To pretend. Naomi nodded. He just wanted to make you happy. I know. Damien looked towards the door. But now I need a favor from you. Anything you want. When I'm not here anymore, can you take kind of him of my daddy? Damien's eyes filled with tears. He'll be lonely, and I don't want him to be sad forever. Naomi didn't know how to answer. She barely knew this man. She'd walked in thinking of 2 minutes, a quick lie, and now a 7-year-old boy was asking her to care for his father. But looking at Damien, she only saw a child who wanted to protect the one he loved. I'll do my best, she promised. I promise you. Damien smiled, a real smile this time. Thank you. Now tell my daddy to come back. Naomi wiped her tears and went to the door. Ethan was leaning against the hallway wall, his head bowed. He wants you to come back in, she told him. Ethan rushed in, his eyes full of worry. Everything okay, son? Yes, Daddy. Damien reached out his hand into him. Everything's perfect. Naomi stayed for another 15 minutes. They talked about simple things. Damien's favorite treat, hot chocolate, his favorite cartoon. How excited he was to see the Christmas fireworks, even though he knew he might not make it. When it was time to leave, Damien took Naomi's hand again. Will you come back? He asked. Naomi looked at Ethan, who seemed as lost as she was. Yes, she answered without thinking. I'll be back. Do you promise? I promise. Damien closed his eyes, satisfied. Naomi and Ethan left the room in silence. They walked down the hall, took the elevator, and only when they reached the parking lot did he speak. Thank you, Ethan said softly. You didn't have to, but thank you. He knows, Naomi said suddenly. Ethan stopped. What? He knows his mother died. He overheard you talking to someone, but he asked to see her anyway because he wanted you to feel better. Ethan paled. He leaned against the car next to him, his legs trembling. He knows, he whispered, and he still wants to protect you. Naomi took a deep breath. He asked me to take care of you when he's gone. Ethan covered his face with his hands and began to sob. There in the middle of the empty hospital parking lot, he finally broke down. Naomi stood beside him, unsure what to do. Finally, she put a hand on his shoulder in a silent gesture of comfort. When Ethan managed to calm down, he looked at her with gratitude. Will you really come back? He asked. Naomi nodded. I will come back. And in that moment, she realized those 2 minutes had turned into something much bigger than she ever imagined. Naomi returned to the Morningstar Cafe that night, her head spinning. She couldn't explain to Mr. Johnson where she'd gone, only saying it was an emergency. He didn't ask further, but his eyes showed curiosity. She lived in a small apartment near the University District with her sister, Rebecca, who was studying nursing. When she got home, Rebecca was in the living room, books scattered on the table. Are you okay? Rebecca asked, frowning. You look like you've seen a ghost. Naomi sat beside her and told her everything about Ethan, about Damien, about the lie that had become a promise. Rebecca listened silently, and when Naomi finished, she took her hand. You have a huge heart, Naomi, but are you sure you want to get involved? This man is a stranger, and the situation is so sad. I know, Naomi replied, but you should have seen the way that boy looked at me like I was the answer to something. I can't just disappear. And the father, Ethan, Rebecca sighed. He's in pain, and I think you're alone in this. Just be careful. Sometimes helping others can cost more than you realize. In the following days, Naomi returned to the hospital every afternoon after work. Ethan was always there, sitting in the chair by Damien's bed. Sometimes he slept there, head resting on the mattress, holding his son's hand. Damien was happy when she arrived. They talked about silly things, movies, food, the drawings he made when he still had the strength. He never mentioned their conversation about her not being his mother again. He simply acted as if it didn't matter. And perhaps, Naomi thought, it truly didn't, because what he needed was affection, presence, not painful truths. One afternoon while Damien slept, Ethan called Naomi into the hallway. I need to tell you something, he said, looking uncomfortable. What is it? I'm not just some random businessman. I own a construction company, Carter Holdings. It's big, and people are going to start asking questions about you. Naomi frowned. What kind of questions? About who you are, why you're here. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. I didn't want you to be exposed to this, but my mother is coming tomorrow. She's complicated, and she'll want to know everything about you. Your mother? Naomi felt a chill. Ethan, I don't know if I can fool more people. Damien is different. He's a child. But your mom, I know, but she can't know the truth. If she finds out I lied to Damien, it will be a scandal. She'll say I'm an irresponsible father, and Damien will hear everything. Ethan looked at her desperately. Please, just a little longer. Naomi wanted to say no. She wanted to return to her simple life, to the cafe, to her talks with Rebecca. But then she remembered the promise she'd made to Damien. Okay, she said finally. But after this, Ethan, you'll have to deal with the consequences alone. I can't keep lying forever. I know, and I'll compensate you. I'll pay whatever you want. Naomi shook her head. It's not about money. It never was. The next day, Ethan's mother arrived at the hospital like a hurricane. She was a tall woman with her graying hair and a perfect bun, wearing a suit that surely cost more than 3 months of Naomi's rent. Her name was Eleanor Carter, and she looked at Naomi with a mix of surprise and distrust. So, you're the famous Anna, Eleanor said sharply, finally deigned to appear. Naomi swallowed. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry I couldn't come sooner. Eleanor crossed her arms. You know my grandson is dying, and you only show up now? What kind of mother does that? Mom, please, Ethan interrupted. It's not the time. Eleanor ignored her son and kept looking at Naomi. I want to know where you've been. I want to know why you abandoned your son and why my son had to raise him alone. Naomi didn't know what to say. She looked at Ethan, who seemed as lost as she was. Just then they heard Damien's voice from the room. Grandma, my mom didn't abandon anyone. Everyone turned. Damien was sitting up in bed, pale but firm. She was working, Grandma. Daddy explained, And now she's here. He looked at Naomi with a small smile. That's what matters. Eleanor looked at her grandson, her expression softening. She went into the room and kissed his forehead. Of course, my love. Grandma's just worried about you. But when she came out 10 minutes later, she pulled Ethan by the arm. We need to talk privately. They walked to the end of the hallway, and Naomi stayed sitting next to Damien, feeling the weight of the situation grow. You are awesome, Damien said, smiling. My grandma scares everyone. She loves you very much, Naomi replied. I know, but sometimes her love is a little overwhelming. He laughed, but the laugh turned into another cough. Naomi helped him drink water and waited until he calmed down. You're getting worse, aren't you? She asked softly. Damien nodded. The doctors don't say it, but I know. It hurts more now, and I'm more tired. Are you scared? He thought for a moment. A little, but my Sunday school teacher said that when you die, you meet everyone who's gone before. So maybe I'll see my real mom, the real one. Naomi felt the tears return. And you will see her, I'm sure. Damien looked at her with those big, sincere eyes. But before that, you have to promise me something. What? Stay with my daddy. He pretends to be strong, but he's not. He needs someone. I don't know if I can promise that, Damien, Naomi said honestly. Your father and I are very different. It doesn't matter. Damien squeezed her hand tightly. Just try. For me. Naomi didn't have the heart to refuse. She just nodded, even though she knew she was making a promise she might not be able to keep. When Ethan returned from the hallway, he looked exhausted. My mom wants you to have dinner with us tomorrow at her house, he sighed. She won't stop until she truly knows you. Naomi closed her eyes. The lie was growing, spreading, and she didn't know how to control it anymore. But when she looked at Damien, she saw him sleeping peacefully and knew she couldn't back out. Dinner at Eleanor Carter's house was exactly what Naomi expected. Uncomfortable. The mansion was in the exclusive suburbs of the city, and its dining room was larger than Naomi's entire apartment. Eleanor served fancy food, but the atmosphere was frigid. She asked direct questions, and Naomi had to invent quick answers, always with Ethan by her side, tense and ready to intervene. So, Anna, what exactly do you do? Eleanor asked, cutting a piece of meat with surgical precision. I work in a café on Main Street, Naomi replied. It's a simple place, but I like it. A café, Eleanor repeated, as if it were an impossibility. And before that, you didn't have another profession? Mom, Ethan tried to interrupt. Let me finish, Ethan. Eleanor looked back at Naomi. I'm just trying to understand how a woman simply disappears from her son's life for years and then reappears working in a cafe. Naomi felt anger rise, but she took a deep breath. She couldn't explode. Things aren't always so simple, Mrs. Carter. Sometimes life leads us down paths we don't plan. Eleanor put down her fork and crossed her hands. Do you know what I think? I think you are not who you say you are. The silence at the table was heavy. Ethan turned pale. Mom, what are you? I made some calls, Eleanor continued, ignoring her son. I spoke to people, and no one, absolutely no one, knows an Anna who had a son with you. Naomi's heart raced. Ethan looked ready to faint. Then Eleanor leaned forward. Who are you really? Before Naomi could answer, Ethan stood up abruptly. Enough, we're leaving. Ethan, sit down. No! His voice was louder than normal. My son is dying. Dying, and all you can think of is interrogating the only person who is helping me give him some peace. Eleanor looked surprised. I'm just trying to protect you and protect Damien. Damien is happy. For the first time in weeks, he's smiling. And you want to destroy that because you don't trust me? Ethan took Naomi's hand. Let's go. They left the house without looking back. In the car, Ethan drove in silence for several minutes. His hands gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. I'm sorry, he finally said. I'm sorry for dragging you into this. It wasn't your fault, Naomi replied. Your mom is just worried. It is my fault. All of this is my fault. Ethan parked the car in an empty lot near a shopping center. He turned off the engine and rested his head on the steering wheel. I'm an idiot, a terrible father. You're not. Yes, I am. He looked at her, his eyes red. I lied to my son because I didn't have the courage to tell him the truth. And now I've involved you, a stranger, in all this. What kind of man does that? Naomi was quiet for a moment, observing him. Then she took a deep breath and shared something she had never told anyone, not even Rebecca. When I was 15, my mom got very sick. Cancer, like Damien. She paused. She asked me to promise to take care of my sister, not to leave her alone. And I promised, even though I was just a kid. Ethan looked at her, waiting for her to continue. But when she died, I panicked. I left. I left Rebecca with my aunt for almost a year because I couldn't deal with the pain. Naomi wiped away a stray tear. So I understand what it's like to make wrong decisions when you're desperate. And I understand that you're just trying to protect your son. Ethan was silent, processing that. How did you manage to go back? Because of my sister. My aunt called me one day and said Rebecca had cried all night, calling my name. And I realized that running away wasn't protecting anyone. It was only making everyone suffer more. She looked at him. So I went back, I apologized, and I promised I would never leave again. And you kept that promise? Every day. Naomi smiled slightly. And you will keep yours for Damien too. Ethan wiped his eyes and nodded. Thank you for everything. And for putting up with me. You're not that hard to put up with, she joked. They sat there a little longer in comfortable silence. Then Ethan drove Naomi home. When she entered her apartment, Rebecca was waiting with her arms crossed. Are you falling for him? Naomi stopped at the door. What? No, I barely know him. Naomi, you go to the hospital every day after work. You're lying to his mother for him. You're getting involved in their lives. Rebecca looked at her with concern. And I see how you talk about him. I'm just helping a child. You're falling for him, Rebecca repeated, and I'm scared of what will happen when all this ends. Naomi didn't answer, because deep down, she was scared of the same thing. In the following days, Damien worsened. He slept more, and when he woke up, he was confused. The doctors increased the morphine, and Ethan practically lived at the hospital. Naomi continued to visit, but it was different now. She and Ethan talked more about life, about regrets, about unfulfilled dreams. She discovered that Ethan had adopted Damien after the boy's biological mother died. She was his childhood sweetheart, Luciana, and she had died from complications during childbirth. Ethan never remarried after that. I loved her, Ethan said one night while Damien slept. And when she died, I swore I would care for her son as if he were mine, because he is, in every way that matters. You're a good father, Naomi said. I don't know, but I tried. A nurse entered the room to check Damien's vital signs, and when she left, a heavy silence remained. It won't be long now, Ethan murmured, his voice broken. The doctors say it might be a matter of days. Naomi took his hand, and this time, he didn't let go. And so with their hands intertwined and a sleeping child between them, Naomi realized Rebecca had been right. She had fallen for Ethan Carter. Not because of his money, not because of his looks, but because of how he loved his son, how he carried his grief with a dignity, how he tried to be strong even though he was completely broken. And she knew that would make everything even harder when the inevitable end came. It was a Thursday morning when Naomi's phone rang at 5 a.m. She answered, her heart racing, already knowing what was coming. Naomi. Ethan's voice was so low she could barely hear it. You'd better come now. She dressed in minutes, woke Rebecca just to let her know, and caught the first taxi she could find. The streets were still empty and the drive to the hospital seemed endless. When she arrived at room 412, Ethan was sitting on the bed, holding Damien in his arms. The boy was awake but breathing with difficulty. His skin was too pale, almost transparent. Hi, Naomi, Damien said with a weak smile. You came fast. Of course I did. She knelt by the bed, taking his little hand. How are you feeling? Tired. He looked at his father, then at her. But I'm happy because you two are here. Naomi felt the tears sting, but she refused to let them fall. Not now, not in front of him. Naomi, I want to tell you a secret, Damien said, his voice growing fainter. Do you want to hear it? Always. I knew from the beginning you weren't my real mom, he smiled, but I pretended you were because I wanted Daddy to be happy. And because you're kind. Ethan sobbed, trying to control himself. Damien, Don't be sad, Daddy. Damien looked at his father with so much love that Naomi felt her heart break. You were always the best daddy in the world. And now you have Naomi, and she's kind. She's going to take care of you. Son, you don't have to worry about me. But I do worry. Damien's breathing became more labored. Promise? Promise you'll let her stay? Ethan looked at Naomi, his eyes filled with tears. I promise. Damien closed his eyes for a moment, as if satisfied. When he opened them again, he looked at Naomi. Thank you for pretending. Thank you for being my mom, even if it was just for a little while. Naomi could no longer hold back. Tears streamed down her face as she kissed Damien's forehead. It was an honor, my love. An honor. Damien smiled one last time. Then his breathing became slower, softer, until it finally stopped. And in the silence of that hospital room, with the faint morning light entering through the window, Damien passed away safely in his father's arms, with Naomi's hand in his. Ethan held his son for a long time, rocking him gently as if he could still comfort him. Naomi stayed by his side, crying silently, until the nurses discreetly entered and asked them to step aside. The next few hours were a blur. Papers to sign, calls to make, funeral arrangements. Eleanor arrived at the hospital with red eyes, but this time she asked no questions. She just hugged her son and cried with him. The funeral was 3 days later in a small church near the city's downtown. Many people came. Damien's schoolmates, teachers, employees of Ethan's company, all with sad faces and words of comfort that sounded empty. Naomi stood at the back of the church during the ceremony. She wasn't part of that family, not really. But when Ethan saw her there, he walked over and took her hand. Stay with me, he pleaded. Please. And she stayed through the entire ceremony, the burial, the reception at Eleanor's house. She stayed because she had promised. For Damien, for Ethan, for herself. When night fell and the last guests had gone, Ethan and Naomi were left alone in Eleanor's garden. He was sitting on a bench, looking up at the stars. He knew, Ethan said suddenly, from the beginning, and he still pretended to protect me. He loved you very much, Naomi replied, sitting beside him. And I failed him. I lied to him until the end. No. Naomi turned Ethan's face so he would look at her. You gave him love, security, a happy, though short life. You didn't fail him. You were exactly the father he needed. Ethan closed his eyes, tears falling again. And now, what do I do now? How do I live knowing he's gone? Naomi had no answer for that. She just took his hand and stayed there in silence, offering the only thing she could, her presence. In the following weeks, Ethan returned to work, but he was different, quieter, more distant. Naomi also returned to the Morning Star, but everything seemed colorless. They met occasionally, a quick coffee, a walk in the park. They didn't talk much, but the others' company seemed enough. It was during one of those walks, nearly 2 months after Damien's death, that Ethan finally said what was on his mind. I don't know how to thank you for what you did, for staying, for loving my son, even though you didn't know me. I didn't do it out of obligation, Naomi said. I did it because I wanted to. Ethan stopped walking and looked at her. I know this will sound strange, and I know we met under the most improbable circumstances, but I don't want you to disappear from my life. He took a deep breath. Damien asked me to let you stay, and I want that, not out of obligation, but because you make me want to live again. Naomi felt her heart accelerate. Ethan, you don't have to answer now. Just think about it. He touched her face softly, because I want to try, if you'll let me. Naomi looked at this man who had entered her life so unexpectedly and realized that despite all the pain, despite all the sadness, there was something there worth keeping. I want to too, she said finally. And for the first time in months, Ethan smiled. They didn't have a perfect ending. The pain of losing Damien never entirely faded, but together they learned to live with it, to honor his memory by building something new. 6 months later, on a quiet afternoon at the Morning Star Café, Ethan proposed to Naomi, not with an expensive ring or a fancy declaration, but with simple words. Will you build a life with me? And she, with tears in her eyes, answered, yes, I will. Because sometimes the most improbable stories are the ones that teach us the greatest lessons, and sometimes in the midst of pain, we find something worth keeping. Eleanor never learned the whole truth about Naomi, but over time, she accepted her into the family, seeing her son smile again, seeing him regain hope. And on every anniversary of Damien's death, Ethan and Naomi visited his grave with fresh flowers and new stories. They told him about the life they were building, about the plans they had, about how much they missed him every day. Because Damien was never forgotten. He lived on in every decision they made, in every moment of love they shared. And that is how a lie told out of desperation became a truth built on love. Sometimes the hardest paths lead us exactly to where we need to be. And love, when it's true, finds a way to be born, even in the most improbable circumstances. If you love this incredible story, be sure to comment below, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Rich Hearts Revealed for more.